morning, or good afternoon. Welcome to the F12 webcast. Today, we're going to be talking about penetration testing and the Goldilocks zone of penetration testing. And we're going to explore the topic writ large. And to help us, I've brought along two cybersecurity experts who have some history and some opinions about penetration testing. Welcome back to our webcast, Calvin Engen. You've been here a few times. You are our Chief Technology Officer. Thanks very much. New to our webcast, I don't think you've joined us before, is Mike Gilbert, our Compliance and Operations Manager. Hopefully I got your title correct. Mike, you've been with the F12 team for, gosh, I was trying to think of how many years you've been with us. Has it been a decade? It's been like
almost
forever.
12.
Yeah,
almost 12 years now.
I was under it. Well, welcome very much. Some folks who've been with F12 for a lot of years, clients and employees, might remember when you were on the support side of things, and they may have spoken with you on the phone, but for many years now, you've been behind the scenes working on security and operations for F12. Both of you are, I'm going to try and get this right, you're CISSP designated, which means you're Certified Information Systems Security Professionals. Did I get that right? Excellent.
Nailed it.
That tells me you know a little bit of something about security. You're responsible for F12 security, and you're responsible for the security of the many clients that we support. So, and I understand you have opinions about penetration testing. Have I got that right?
That would be accurate. Yes.
Okay, great, excellent. So, what we're going to explore today is not just your experience with penetration testing, but really what I wanted to do this webcast was, after talking to you both about AI, and AI is in the news with ChatGPT, and you know it's going to take all of our jobs. But before then, before we lose our jobs to the great AI, I wanted to talk about this whole notion about penetration testing, hackers, how they're using AI, how we can use AI to help defend ourselves, and what that all means for protecting us. But first of all, I wanted to set the scene on where I and perhaps the audience are coming into on pen testing. So do you mind if I share with you kind of what I think of it as? I think of it as like my annual physical. I only do it because my wife nags me. I don't look forward to it. I get it, you know, and hopefully I get no bad news, but there's always something, and I know what it is. It's going to be, listen, you're overweight and you need to move more and eat differently. And I go, oh, thank you so much, as if I got any insight from that. But I learned that I'm not going to die today. I express some gratitude to the doctor and I move along. That's basically, and I view penetration testing as kind of the same idea. That's my novice, inexperienced view. I'm going to start with Mike, if you don't mind. Mike, you've been on both sides of penetration testing, I understand. Like, you've gotten it done to F12, you help clients with it, all that sort of stuff. Am I right? Like, what is a penetration test? If, like, does it compare to a physical? If you don't mind my asking it that way.
It definitely can. So penetration testing is essentially having somebody try and break into your house. Essentially, you want to find out where all the weaknesses are, and make sure that you can close those doors proactively. So instead of waiting to see and hoping that you have everything done, you're getting an outsider to actually go around and check all the doors, check all the handles. Can they actually open the door and get in? What ways can they get into that? So sort of at a high level, that's penetration testing.
So whereas a physical says, this is where you're ill, it doesn't say, let's give you cancer and see how you respond. Right. A penetration test is like another level, is what you're saying. Like, hey,
the doctor,
let's want to lose weight. Let's let you experience some diabetes for a little while, and then you'll know. Okay, I got it. Apologies to anybody if I'm offensive, but I get it. It's another level. Calvin, the same question to you. Help us understand what penetration testing is.
Yeah. So, you know, think about it as a, you know, from a standpoint of, if you're going to have a nefarious actor try to breach your network, get into your business, and they're motivated by a number of different factors, but often it is to get access to information they shouldn't have, or money that you don't want them to have. And so really a penetration test is trying to give you the where your risk is in an organization. And many people confuse penetration testing with vulnerability testing, and it's not. It's actually completely different. Vulnerabilities exist in applications and software and you know, web applications, etc. And that just means, hey, you might have an unlocked door or unlocked window. But a penetration test is really around the exploitability of that unlocked door, unlocked window. And so what's important there is this is important because that's the same method a penetration test will do as a nefarious actor would use. And so if you get that information early, then you can actually make a decision to maybe lock that window
Okay.
or otherwise. And so that's really what we're trying to do with a penetration test. There's a number of factors that might drive an organization to do said thing. Maybe it's your nagging wife, but I think it's also there's regulatory industries. There's a requirements around cyber insurance, and then there's what I would say is making sure that you're not a victim in the cyber landscape that exists, and making sure that you can protect the business that you've created by knowing where your risk is and making an educated decision.
So we're getting into a little bit of the why of it, and you started to touch on something that I think is really interesting for me, and that is there's our theme here is about Goldilocks, and Goldilocks, there's 3 bowls, there's 3 beds, there's 3 chairs, and at the end of the day, we thought about, we could actually treat this as a hacker, because in some way she's hacking into somebody's house and like eating their food. It's not a great story.
Yeah.
Anyway, people don't care because it's bears. That's not fair. There's 3 terms that are similar in my mind, and I'm not sure that I understand the difference. And you talked about vulnerability scanning, or there's vulnerability scanning, there's
Hmm.
penetration testing, there's
Hmm.
cybersecurity assessments. Now,
Hmm.
maybe it's because I'm in sales and marketing. Are those all the same thing, just through a different marketing lens? You kind of talked about, well, vulnerability is one thing, penetration's another. Maybe I'll start with you, Mike. Like, when you think about vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, and security assessments, what's the difference, if there is one?
Yeah, so there is quite a difference. Vulnerability testing is more around what are the weaknesses and trying to identify them, but it's not actually testing to see if you can actually exploit them, like Kelvin
I'm just
was
going to
saying
stop you
there.
right now, because I'm trying to understand that difference. So if a vulnerability scan, how do I identify a weakness, but yet I haven't tested it? Like, help me connect the dots in my brain. What do you mean by that?
So with a vulnerability scanner, usually it's doing a scan and trying just to get information about your environment. So it's
Okay.
trying to see what you have installed, what versions, everything along those lines, and then what are the known weaknesses in there. So it's just a very low level of here's everything that we have, here's all the possible weaknesses, but we don't know if you've mitigated them. We don't know if you have something else in place that's going to block us. All we know is these are all of the problems. And it doesn't also do lateral movement. And lateral movement is essentially, so you have a vulnerability that's not necessarily a big deal, but can you use that vulnerability to then get further into the environment or exploit servers and things along those lines? And that's sort of the difference there. The vulnerability scan, you can get sort of a laundry list of these are things that we think are wrong. The penetration test goes that extra step of now, can we use those vulnerabilities to get in? Can we get a password from a computer that has a vulnerability? Can we get in through your firewall into your accounting system? And then all of a sudden we have access to money, things along those lines.
So, and we'll get into a security assessment, but I think I just want to make sure I anchor the point, so at least I'm not confused, and hopefully the audience either. So it's a different order. Like, it seems like you start with like a penetration testing, like where they seem similar is you're starting to look for vulnerabilities, but you're going much further. Stop me if I'm getting this wrong. To say, okay, we see that your garage door is unlocked, but can we now get into your house and your bedroom and your safe through there? And like, what does that actually mean in practice? And we're going to try to do all that. Am I
Exactly.
okay? Okay. So, and that's why we see a price difference, because vulnerability scanning sometimes is even done by your insurance provider and all the rest, and it provides information. And then you would say penetration test goes a little bit further. We're way further. Okay.
Much further. Yes.
Much further. Okay. All right. Hence the term penetration. So, right, like you can look at the, okay, I that makes sense. And maybe I'll pivot over to Calvin then, and I'll come back to you, Mike, to answer the same question, because I did set it up for you. Okay, so now you've got a penetration test and you got a cybersecurity assessment or security assessment things. What's the difference between those two things?
Yeah, so a security assessment, and there's a number of them out there, but effectively what it's doing is looking at your organization's security posture. So, what are the things that you do in your organization? Do you have policies? Do you have procedures? Do you have all that documented? Are your employees informed? Do you do cybersecurity awareness training with your employees? Do you test them? And
Okay.
it's all the elements that would wrap around a mature cybersecurity program that your organization would do. And so it validates that you're doing those best practices. And so it starts there. It can go deeper into technologies that you're maybe have implemented throughout your organization. Do you have advanced endpoint protection or managed detection and response, and making sure that you have those elements? Because if you don't, then you would have some risk. And those would be elements that you would then want to go and obtain and help protect your organization. So this is more of a here's a checklist of all the things that you should be doing in your organization and how well are you doing those. And that it would be a security assessment. Now, there's a number of gap analysis that you can do, run against particular regulatory frameworks and
Okay.
the like Cybersecure Canada or the NISC CSF or a number of others. But I think it's important that it is not just a company coming to you and saying, "Hey, these are the checklists that you should do." It is based on a framework often.
Okay. So Mike, I'm going to go to you because Calvin intimidated me with all those acronyms. So I'm gonna try an analogy and see if I'm right. All right. So we got vulnerability scanning is like going, hey, looks like your windows may be open and you're using a garage door opener from 1970 that anybody can hack or whatever. Like, okay. Penetration testing, we're going in, we're getting in, we're demonstrating actually how a vulnerability can happen. Now, a security assessment, I'm going to try an analogy, see if this works. Is like, okay, we notice your garage door is unlocked. What's your policy for actually locking the garage door? Do you have a policy where after you get in the car, before you get in the car, you lock the door, you lock them at night before you put, after you tuck the kids to bed, or so it's like the technology is scrutinized from pen testing, but cybersecurity assessments go further into your policies and practices in your organization. Is that
Yeah,
along the right
Yeah,
track?
and
exactly. So, sorry. So if it's like if you had a fire
Yeah.
and you do have a fire extinguisher, that's good.
Okay.
If you don't know where it is, if your policy doesn't, if you don't have a
Ah,
policy saying this is where my fire extinguisher is, and your employees don't know where the fire extinguisher is, then it doesn't really matter that you have a fire
and
extinguisher
you
at that
haven't
point.
checked it in 10 years, so it's completely
Exactly.
unfunctional. I see. Okay. So that leads me to my question, which I'll maybe go to Calvin on this. That was really helpful, by the way. I get it, but I'm a business or an organization, not for profit, whatever. Now my head's full of there's vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, cybersecurity test. Like, when does an organization need a penetration test, and when, or is it an either or question? Like, what drives an organization to get one of those three services to scrutinize their cybersecurity?
yeah, I think you got to be pragmatic here. At the end of the day, if I would venture to say you need all of them in this day and age, but if you're going to spend a dollar somewhere, spend it on something that's going to be meaningful.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is you want to. It wouldn't matter that you have all these vulnerabilities if you don't do patch management. If patch management isn't part of your policy, the reality is that guess what? A security
You have
assessment will tell you
vulnerabilities. Like, you don't even
you
have to
have
worry
them.
about it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know what? The penetration test will tell you the same thing. And so it doesn't actually matter that you go and do that. It's you I would weight them in this order: security assessment, vulnerability assessment, penetration test. And the reason
Okay.
why that exists, and as much as I would want everyone to make sure they get a penetration test and they understand where their risk is, because it's very wholesome, it gives you a really great data. The reality is that you need to start at the basic level, because most people in this day and age still don't do the thing that is go get an assessment on what you're doing. If you never visit the doctor, then why would you do anything other than go visit the doctor?
Okay, time for another terrible Gillard analogy, and this might be, I haven't thought this one through. So let's say that a penetration test is analogous to actually starting a fire in your house and seeing how it all works. Like, that the fire suppression comes on and does everything work the way it wants. Maybe this is stretching it. Before you do that, maybe make sure you got fire alarms in place, and you've got fire extinguishers, and like testing your fire response maybe isn't the top of the priority if you haven't got the basics done. So what you're saying is a security assessment will help you get your basics in order.
Yeah.
And rather, okay, that's great. Quick question: can you get all three? Can you get a security assessment that includes a vulnerability scan and a penetration testing all in one engagement? Okay, you can. All right, that's good to know. Let's call that the special value meal. That's like your fries, your drink, and your burger. Okay. Then the question I'm going to ask next is there reasons, like you're talking about doing that in order to mature your cybersecurity? Are there other reasons why you might want to get a penetration test? That it's required or mandated? Does that happen? Do either of you know if that's something that an insurer or, I don't know, regulator or your investors may just want you to do?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing
Okay.
more cyber insurance require it, that you at least do it annually. It's like go to the doctor, get an annual checkup.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
need to
yeah.
do it because the risk is so severe, because those are the same methods that attackers are using. And so if you don't close your door or lock it, you know that you're going to get breached. And then if you're not doing it, you're not going to get the policy that's going
Oh,
to cover you.
fantastic. Okay. Okay.
So
Yeah. So there's requirements. Mike, then I'll ask you, I understand you've been involved in getting external penetration testing done on F12 for years. Like, why do we get penetration tested?
So why we get it is the same reason, honestly, anybody should get it. Is it's extremely important to have somebody external from your environment who isn't making any assumptions, who doesn't have any vested interest of, oh, I'll just fix that right away, to actually go in and take a look at the environment and then give that like valuable data so that people can actually, like your executives, they can manage that risk. So they know what they're dealing with, what changes are made. We can make priorities. Like Calvin says, if you have to spend $1, make sure you spend it in the right place, because you could invest in a whole bunch of fancy security software, but if you're not locking your front door, it doesn't matter that you have an alarm. Somebody's going to be able to still get in.
It occurs to me it could be a very powerful tool for the IT manager who knows that they need to advocate for more budget and attention on cybersecurity matters. Now they're armed with an independent third-party report that they can take to senior management, maybe the board of directors, whomever they need to do in their sphere of influence to help unlock the attention that the organization needs to pay pre-breach. Like we see a lot of attention post-breach, but this is all about, please, can we lock, what's the analogy? There's something about a barn and lock the barn before the cows are out. I don't know. Somebody will correct me on the chat about the saying I'm trying to get to. That's super helpful. Since F12 has had a lot of penetration tests over the years, I want to go to the good, the bad, the ugly about penetration tests. I'm going to swing this over to you, Calvin. What's been our experience with the penetration tests we've received traditionally? Good, bad, and ugly.
yeah, so basically what you have is you have someone that is certified in ethical hacking, right? It's basically the people that are defending against kind of malicious individuals. And so what they're doing is they're taking the same techniques that malicious, nefarious actors are using, and testing it against the environment and saying, okay, what is possible? And so what we end up finding is there's a lot of organizations that are in this space, and they're trying to provide that visibility within the market. And it's like anything, right? When you have people doing something, the caliber of that individual, whether they're fresh or have 5 years or have maybe 10 or 15 years, you're getting a varying degree of security professional. And of course, then there's a varying scale of cost based on that. And because humans are the ones doing the work, there's a finite amount of time. And of course, their time is worth X amount of dollars. So when you start getting into these scenarios, is often you're like, I need to get the penetration test. And if you get a scope of work, that scope of work maybe will have X amount of hours associated with doing said task. And so a lot of organizations, what they'll do when you buy a pen test is you'll have a segment of the network that you want to test against. And so you'll test against that machine. You'll get a maybe a passing grade, a failing grade, or somewhere in between. And then the challenge becomes is getting a report that actually you can take to maybe a board or the executives that is
Translating
meaningful.
into business language, like what are the
Correct.
priorities? Right. Okay.
Yeah. And so often I find is that the people are talented, don't get me wrong. The challenge is that the amount of time that it takes for them to do that said task is one gap, one variable of gap. And the other component is the amount of the scope of the network could be very large. And in some engagements, those can be, hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend
Oh
the
my.
actual amount of time to do it. Or it could be very basic, down to, a few $1,000s. But then you get what you pay for, and it's not much. You might get the check, but is it actually worth the value of the organization? And so you think about kind of that as the common stream here. It's important to
Okay.
do, but it's only as good as the people doing it and the amount of time they have to do it.
So this is really getting to the heart of the matter, because this is what I think is really exciting about some of the conversations we've had before this about things that unlock those. But let's make sure we've really landed that point, and that I understand it fully. There's traditional penetration testing was dependent upon the quality you received, was that individual's technical expertise. And let's be honest, cybersecurity professionals like you two gentlemen are hard to come by. Like there's a shortage. I think there's been lots in the news about that. And their experience. So that's one function, not just technically in how they know, but you were saying it goes a step further. Do they understand business? Can they help translate that into a language that can be, for lack of a better term, consumed by the decision maker, so that they make better decisions based upon the intel you've gathered? So that's a function. The second function, which is really interesting, was time. So how much
Yeah.
and how much scope of the the entire, what do you call it, a threat map
Attack
or a
attack surface.
attack surface? Oh, great term. So the attack surface that they can actually analyze in their penetration, and that's going to depend upon their time and your budget. Okay, and this is Mike. Maybe I'll ask you, because one of the things I understood in our previous conversation about this was there's a big difference between just penetration testing the outside, the external, and actually going a step further and looking at the term Calvin used as a larger attack surface. Why does that matter? And are organizations missing out by just looking at the outside versus the inside?
Yeah, definitely. So just looking at the outside, sometimes you only get a partial picture, because not that's not where all the threats come from. So you can take a pretty deep look at the edge of your environment, your firewall configuration, things along those lines, how your websites are set up, and then how that can be exploited. But often, as is the case with pretty much everything, is the people actually working for you or working in the company, they can unintentionally bring threats in with them. So they can click a button, they can download something from the internet, and
Mm-hmm.
then all of a sudden now it doesn't matter that it got past that external, it's now the internal, your whole internal environment. So that's where the internal part of the testing is definitely important. And
So
the attack surface is a lot wider at that point.
so kind of traditionally, it was like you put your firewall in, you stop the bad guys from getting in from whatever foreign country they're trying to attack you, and you're good. But now they're phishing people, they're getting in, they're bypassing all that anyway. And so your real risks are, once somebody has somehow penetrated internally, what bad things can they do? How are you protected? And okay, I'm unless you correct anything there, that's making sense to me. So we've talked now about and broadly speaking, there's sort of three, I understand, penetration tests. We've talked about the manual one. We're going to leave the exciting AI one to last, but I want to go. So I've seen in the past kind of two. There's the manual one you talked about, which has the benefits of individual expertise, but also some of those limitations you talked about. Then I've seen automated penetration testing,
Yeah.
sometimes even free. And I've been a little confused. Like, what is that, and how does that compare to the manual penetration testing that we were just kind of describing? Is that the answer? It's like you run it automated, it's just great, it's free. Why not just do that?
So often you find that you get into free penetration testing tools. and you go to a website and you're like, oh, I can just sign up here, I can go do it, and off I go. So the challenge is that it's actually a kind of a misnomer. Is when you go and do something like that, it is often just a vulnerability test. And so the challenge becomes is, yes, it might look at the doors, but a penetration test is actually exploiting and moving within that environment. So um, I'm going to step back a little bit just for a second. Penetration testing has 5 phases. Okay, so 5 phases is phase 1 is reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is going out and gathering information, and that could be a number of different things. That could just be doing a scan externally or internally. It's gathering the details. It could be the IPs that you're using, could be the websites that you have in your organization. That's
So
the
at Ocean's
reconnaissance.
11, that's when they're casing the casinos.
Yeah,
Where's the
exactly.
cameras? Yeah.
So you're getting all the data, and
Okay.
then phase 2 is the scanning of that. So the scanning of all of those things that you found out that an organization has. Phase 3 is then gaining access. It's taking what you know and saying, how do I now exploit that? And so now you're exploiting said discovery of whatever it is.
All right.
Phase 4 is maintaining access. And then phase 5 would be covering your tracks, because penetration testing is
Okay.
not just it's like it's getting persistence, because you're wanting to test your tools. Did your tools detect that you're actually doing an attack? And so then you would understand,
Oh,
oh, I
so it's not enough
validated.
just to know that the door's unlocked. You want to wander around, go in the fridge, make a sandwich, see if
Yeah.
anybody notices,
Did my alarm go off?
Yeah,
Did it?
okay.
Did it actually realize that somebody came into my house, and did it trigger? And then did my team, who's responsible for maintaining my security, did they react accordingly? Did they do that within a certain amount of time? And so this is a validation of all of the things that you would have said, put all your policies in place. Did you know where the fire extinguisher were? Did you go grab that fire extinguisher? Did you put out the fire? Did you do that in a reasonable time frame? Did you alert everybody in the building to get out of the building, etc.?
Mm.
Yeah. And so when I go back to this free testing, you could maybe just do 1 or 2 of those phases and call it penetration testing. It is part of penetration testing, but it's not the full suite of possibly penetration testing.
It's
So
step
that's it.
1 or 1.2 kind of thing or something. I see.
Often is what I find. That's
Okay.
where that goes, and that's still good information to have, by the way. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but it's maybe just a couple steps removed from what you may want to be looking at. I think also then the component that we were talking about is automation, is autonomous, or the ability to kind of um, look at the full picture. And I think this is what's often missing in penetration testing, is you get a very narrow scope of work to get the compliance check mark that you're looking for. And so because
Okay.
if time is money, then
Yeah.
you want to limit that amount of time to something that's meaningful.
Okay. So we've talked about, I was going to lay it up because we're going to get to kind of the heart of the matter here, which I'm excited to talk about, and I know you gentlemen are too. There's I'll call it the low end. There's the free, sometimes free, automated penetration test, which is basically one step up from a vulnerability scan. There's the manual one, which can be great or not, but can be expensive and time consuming, and it depends upon the acumen of the individuals doing the testing and how much of the attack surface they're able and in your budget and their time to analyze. And then interpreting those results depends upon their
Yeah.
ability to translate it. So, I mean, that's always the unicorn, right? The really smart technical guy that can also speak business language. All right, great. And now, boom, there's something called AI-assisted autonomous penetration testing. I'm going to go to Mike first because Calvin, you and I have spoken about this a lot, and I was really blown away with it. But I really want to hear, Mike, how is this different? How does it compare to the other two classes of penetration tests we talked about? Like you be Goldilocks, is it just right? Or in what circumstances is it just right?
So it really is sort of the best of both worlds when it comes to that. So you can lean into some of the consistency that you can get from an automated test. You don't necessarily have to limit the scope as much because you're not paying a person to do all the checks, but you get a really solid foundation of the entire environment, everything that the automated
Okay.
testing and the AI assisted part can actually see. And then you have a skilled security analyst who's actually going to be able to sort of step off that data, so they can see what they found, and then within that scope of work say, okay, so my automated tool was able to pull all of these passwords, so I'm already that far in. Now what can I exploit that the automated tool didn't? So then you can continue to step in that environment after you've already done that first step, and it means you're not missing out on, I've got 8 hours to get a pen test done and I
Yeah.
need to focus on these machines. It's, I was able to pull a password from this machine that is not necessarily related to where you have all of your critical data, but then I was able to use that password to get into that critical data, and now I'm in your invoices, and I'm able to change your accounting data and all of that stuff.
Okay, so bit of best
Here.
of both worlds. Calvin, I can see you're chomping at the bit to jump in. Go ahead, my friend.
So here, I want to tell you a story. So, we came off the back of a penetration test last year, and we do a couple different things. One, we're testing our security stack. We're testing our security operations to determine whether or not they can see, set attack, and respond accordingly. And we do that, and that's good because we passed. That's fine. What we also do though is we turn everything off.
What do you mean by everything? Like what, the lights? Like what do you mean?
Yeah. So we turn off all the security controls that we would have,
I see.
and so we assume,
Why?
hey, because let's assume that maybe it got compromised, and they
Oh,
were
I
maybe
see.
a threat actor was able
So
to
you're
turn
gonna
those
turn
things
off
off.
all of the smoke detectors and all the rest and see what happens.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
And then because now we can actually say, okay, well, if you had the security guard at the front door, but maybe they took a break,
I
whatever
see.
happened. And so now let's see how can they actually enter into the house and see what they can do. And so we did that with a security professional. They came in, did that, and they weren't able to do anything. Okay. And so we had a couple things that we could work on and improve our security posture, and off we went. We then went and we're doing validation because my gut feeling was like there's something more. Like we got to get to a little bit more detail around this, and so we started exploring some of these scanning tools and this automated testing, and so we had the opportunity to do this on our network. Went out, went through it. It then, with the tools on, it started to gain some information that a person didn't.
Interesting.
And so then what it was able to do was actually say, okay, well, this is a known bad password on an individual. Well, that's interesting. And so what it could do from that is now say, well, now I have access to this user's account because it's a bad password. Now we have multi-factor authentication, but in this day and age, you can still actually go against that. And I'll talk about that in a different webinar.
Our next podcast will be, our webcast will be about that exact topic. Yeah.
But basically, the autonomous scan was able to say, oh, I know this password. I can exploit that password. But now what its job is to actually get privileged information. And so it needs to basically escalate privileges so that now it can move freely throughout the environment. And so then it could look at maybe a vulnerability from that and then gain access to, say, domain admin credentials. And then from domain credentials, you effectively have a compromised network very quickly. And it was able to do this within a few hours. Like, I mean, it went out, crawled the network, found out the one machine over there that wasn't part of our test plan, but it was able to find it, scrape
Oh,
those
wow.
credentials, then move over to another device over there, and it laterally moved and spread its way away.
When you say it, are you talking about like this is an AI that's taking contextual information and now altering its testing based on it, or like what? Like
Yeah,
what is going on?
so it's not intelligent, I would say.
Okay.
This is a series of autonomous behavior that it goes through, and so it has a list of things, of known vulnerabilities, of known exploits that exist
Okay.
out on networks, and so it can iterate through that. But guess what? When it's autonomous, it can iterate very quickly, much quicker than a human could possibly do this. And so you get a full spectrum of scope across a network very quickly, and then you can gain the insights of where maybe that's vulnerable. This is why it's so important to do penetration testing, is because technology changes. Like, new things are always constantly coming out. And so I argue that annual is not even enough, but it gives you a point of reference and a point in time. Because guess what? Tomorrow there's a new vulnerability, there's a new thing that's happening, and so it's so important to get that level of context. And so it can do that at a speed that we've never seen before, and with a richness of the total amount of scan in far less time than you would, not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the same result.
So I'm going to write the headline for this, which was, after years of manual penetration testing by third-party experts, AI discovered within a few hours vulnerabilities that were unknown, that were significant enough, it said, through a chain of attacks to get all the way to domain admin, which is, for those who aren't familiar, that's everything. That's your main network credentials, so you could do anything. And using AI along with human directed response, etc. Boom! That was what happened. You and your team were able to uncover and resolve exposures that otherwise we were ignorant of. Is that more or less true?
Yeah, we didn't have the visibility, and so once we have visibility, we can go solve the problem for sure.
Yeah.
And so this enriched our ability to see where there was gaps, because this would have been the same. You think about, and the nefarious actor isn't constrained by time. They're not. They are
Okay.
effectively going to do whatever they need to do to try to breach your network. And so they have an upper hand already. And so if you don't have the full context of your entire environment, the threat actors will.
Okay.
And so you want to have that same visibility so that you can, lock the doors and make sure you have the adequate protections in place. And I think that's really the magic here.
So I'm gonna go back to this Goldilocks idea. So generally speaking, you've got free automated penetration testing. Let's call that bowl too cold. Like, yeah, it'll get you something. You'll eat some porridge, but it's a little cold. You got manual testing, which can be good, but it can be too hot. It's expensive, slow. Mike, I think you called this kind of like the best of both worlds, or for some organizations, just right. And this is the service that we're now offering through to organizations that would like to engage with F12 and penetration testing. Help me understand again, how is this substantially different than free testing? Since there's some automation involved, is it an order of magnitude better? Is it like what? Does it compare? Should I just go and get the free test? Like what's the difference here?
A lot of the free testing has some serious limitations, and a lot of that is around how they're attacking. They typically are attacking from external. You're not getting internal tests and things along those lines. So that's definitely part of it. So on as well as they don't actually have a security analyst going and reviewing, they're not guiding it, they're not saying, okay, so I found this, now can I pivot, and some of it is, can I feed the system these new credentials that I found? Can I also just manually myself use these credentials or this vulnerability or all of that to get in?
Okay.
So it's that human interaction at the right places, when you don't necessarily need it at every step of a scan, because that's very, very costly, but a human can then read the results and then use those results to turn it into something
So
substantial.
I'm gonna try another analogy, and Calvin, you might like this because some of you know that I like to buy old BMWs because I love my mechanics so much. And I bought the little scanning tool, so I don't spend as much money, and it gives me information like, oh, the computer has told me fix
Yeah.
this on my BMW, because there's always something to fix on my old BMW. But I'm not a mechanic. And boy, that same tool in the hands of a mechanic is like 90 times more powerful, because they actually know. Like every time I talk to my mechanic, goes, "Oh yeah, well it's this. This is exactly." They just have a knowledge, but it's them
Experience.
plus the
Yeah.
tool. It's the experience plus the tool. Is that a fair way of saying it? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Maybe just to highlight the free tools is, um, you get what you pay for. And so the challenge is, if you understand how to read that, that's great. But the other thing is that, we're at a different kind of level playing field here. And can you imagine you have tools out there where how do you trust that tool? Like, I
Mm.
mean, in general, we're plagued with a lot of nefarious software that exists out there. And so all of a sudden you use maybe a free tool, and maybe it just harvests all that information about your network, and guess what happens? and go sell it to the nefarious actors. And guess what? You just gave them the wide open
I
door
hadn't
of all
thought
the
about that.
things that
Yeah.
you could be doing. And so I think it's super important that that one, you're finding a provider that you trust. Now, there's a code of ethics that exists with certified ethical hackers, in which they don't go out and try to find the work. They have to actually have a relationship with the organization, and not at the executive level to say, you're authorizing me to come into your network and breach you, because that's what you're asking me to do, so that I can provide you a report on that. And that is something that is unique. And there's these, call them white hat hackers. We have the black hat, which is the nefarious ones, and we have the gray
Okay.
ones. The gray ones are the ones that say, "Hey, I just banged on your door and I noticed it was unlocked, and so you want to pay me some money." And so it's it's just shady. And so I just think about free tools is one of those aspects that it
It'd be a
might provide you
shame if
some.
something happened to your network you got here. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So just be aware. I wouldn't say that's it could happen, and I would just be cognizant of that if you're leaning into those types of tools. So
All right. So I get the reticence about the free for sure, and the limitations of the scanning. We've talked about the power of AI along with human intelligence to, you know, do more of the attack surface. So I guess I'll just ask on the other side, like, does it ever still make sense for organizations to do manual penetration testing? Is AI gonna kill the old-fashioned manual penetration testing, or does it have its place? And if so, where? If you have opinions on that, either Mike or
oh my
Calvin.
gosh, yes. So yes, I would say we're in this inflection point where
Okay.
you need better visibility to make better educated decisions on risk in your organization. And I don't think you can do that in a manual fashion. I think it has to be augmented with autonomous AI capabilities, because guess what? The nefarious actors have the same technologies and tools at their disposal. And so, as we have this arms race effectively in cybersecurity, it's always kind of two steps forward, one step back. And I think it's only a matter of time where this is what we have to live in. And so, this is relatively new technology in this space that is exciting. Most organizations don't go to this level to understand where their risk is at. We're starting to see industry push organizations towards that outcome. And so, really, the opportunity now is to get that visibility now and continuously do that in a meaningful way. And what I love about this technology is that it's economical. It's something that is obtainable, and you get to lean into that now. Whereas before, you would just have to go and have like the lowest common denominator, which was maybe a person and a limited scope of work, limited amount of time, and you've got your checkbox. But did you actually get the information you needed to make an educated decision? Arguably not.
All right. This is great. I just want to share with everybody. I got a call from Calvin a couple months back. You won't believe this, and he shared with me what Mike, you and with the tool had created in the penetration test on F12, the information, the insight. I was actually blown away. Um, and I would just like to encourage anybody who's curious about this to reach out to f12.net. We'd be happy to show you some sample reports, a little bit about what you could get, so you understand it before you make an investment in penetration testing, or maybe, to your point or earlier, Calvin, walk you back from it and suggest there's something else your organization needs first before penetration testing. I think it starts with a conversation. Fair to say? Okay.
Always.
Mhm.
Excellent. So if you're an F12 customer already, your account manager can help you connect up with the F12 security operations team. And if you're not, sales at f12.net, we'd be happy to chat with you about your overall cybersecurity posture and whether F12 or some of our security partners can help fill the gaps, or uncover the gaps, or fill the gaps in your cybersecurity regime. So thank you, Calvin and Mike, for helping explore this topic about penetration testing and what's the just right bowl of porridge as it comes to penetration tests. I think we killed analogies left, right, and
Oh my
center today,
gosh.
which I will say is a job well done by my rating system. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Have a really great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.